Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday morning, and welcome to Penn Vicarage. Hope you're well and cheerful. Good to see you this morning, and thank you for joining us for our Bible talk for this morning as we continue our way through the amazing book of Psalms. And today is another absolute beauty. It's Psalm 112, and so here goes. Psalm 112 it will be. Praise the Lord. Happy are those who fear the Lord, who greatly delight in his commandments. Their descendants will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in their houses, and their righteousness endures forever. They rise in the darkness as a light for the upright. They are gracious, merciful, and righteous. It's well with those who deal graciously and lend, who conduct their affairs with justice. For the righteous will never be moved. They will be remembered forever. They are not afraid of evil tidings. Their hearts are firm, secure in the Lord. Their hearts are steady. They will not be afraid. In the end, they will look in triumph on their foes. They've distributed freely. They've given to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Their horn is exalted in honor. The wicked see it and are angry. They gnash their teeth and melt away. The desire of the wicked comes to nothing. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, another beautiful psalm here. If you were listening yesterday, you'll notice that Psalms 111 and Psalm 112 are very similar. In fact, Psalm 113 is quite similar too. But 111 and 112 are basically a bit like a kind of a pair. They're very similar in lots of ways. They both begin with the word Alleluia, or praise the Lord, if you notice. They're both 10 verses long, and both are actually, and we can't read it in English, they're both Hebrew acrostics, by which it means they both go sort of the Hebrew version of A, B, C, D, and the way through. So verse 1 as A, and so on and so on. So I don't read Hebrew, but I believe if I did, you'd see an acrostic in verse 111 and 112. Okay, so they're both very similar. Both, notice, 10 verses long. Both begin with the word Alleluia, and both are Hebrew acrostics in a similar kind of way. And they kind of work together as a bit of a pair too. Psalm 111 is really about the works of God, okay, about the great things that God does. And God does great things to make, and with the purpose of making us his friend, helping us to be his friends. And ends with, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Psalm 112 kind of starts off with, if you have the fear of the Lord, this is what you'll get. So in a sense, verse 111 is more about God and about with the great works of God. And what we should do about it. Psalm 112 is really kind of the upshot of that. If the fear of the Lord is what you put your fear, if we fear the Lord, this is what we'll get. So 111 is more about God. 112 is more, in a sense, about what it means to fear God and how to live life and what that kind of means. Okay. Now, yesterday we talked about fear, not being terror, but being in awe of, being remembering how big and how great to show God massive, the respect that God deserves. Then another word I want to look at this morning is the word happy or the word blessed. Now, unfortunately, it's kind of the English doesn't really kind of translate this right. Happy sounds a bit too kind of whoopee-dee, and it's kind of a bit too much of a feeling there, a bit kind of happy, happy something. It's not. It's better than that. The word blessed used to be used, but kind of blessed gives the impression of good. It's like something out of church, you know. It's more, and people talk about things like contented, but it's more than that. It's the Hebrew word shalom is kind of what you kind of get from that. It means kind of an inner peace with God and the world and yourself, and a kind of. It's kind of contentment, but it's more than contentment. It's happy, but it's more than happy, and it's blessed, but it's kind of more than blessed. It means to be at peace, really, with yourself, with God, with the world, and so on. Okay, and so that's really what it means. But then, there are a few kind of upshots from that. Okay, firstly, to say that people that put God first, it has effects not just for yourself, but for people around you as well. Notice in verse 2, we're talking about their descendants will be mighty in the land. Okay, so the blessings of the fear of the Lord aren't just for yourself, but your blessings do extend to your family around you. So, for example, often if you follow God, the chances are, for example, your children will grow up knowing what it's like to fear the Lord. They know what it's like. Even if your children go astray or whatever, you're still praying for them, that kind of thing. So there are benefits not just for yourselves, but for your family and for the people around you. And I believe as a church, for example, at St. Bart's and St. Anne's, by putting God first, it doesn't just bless us, but it blesses the people around us. So the great thing here, it doesn't just bless us, but it blesses the people around us too. Another thing to point out is, of course, by putting our faith and our trust in God, in a sense, godness kind of comes on in us. So, for example, in verse 4, he talks about they are generous, they are gracious, they are merciful, and they are righteous. Now, in verse 100, in Psalm 111, it talks about God being gracious, merciful, and righteous. So, in a sense, by following God, in a sense, these things come on in us too. So, for example, we all know, if you follow God well, you'll know that, you know how gracious God's been to us. You know how merciful God is to us. And you know, if God's been gracious and merciful to us, it's much more likely you're going to show that mercy and grace to other people as well. So by putting your trust and faith in God, in a sense, we do develop some God things about us too. So as he's gracious with us, so we're more likely to be gracious with other people. As he's been merciful to us, we're more likely to be merciful to others. And as he's righteous, so we maybe will become more righteous too. That's kind of really important to kind of say that. What else does it do? By putting God first, by living life God's way, we become more honest. We act with greater integrity. And this is quite interesting because, you know, for example, the Ten Commandments tell us about not bearing false witness against your neighbour and all this type of stuff, and about not stealing and not this type of thing. And actually, if we follow God properly, then in a sense we become more honest. What happens then is people start to trust us more because we're more trustworthy. And if people start trusting you, people give you more responsibility and that type of thing. The classic example of this is Daniel in the Old Testament, who, even though they were living in Babylon, the king of Babylon at the time, Nebuchadnezzar, I think it was, in the early chapters of Daniel, trusted Daniel as well as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as well, because he realized that they were trustworthy people and they were following God, and therefore they were more honest and trustworthy. Therefore, people knew they could trust them. And that's what they duly did, which is why they progressed and did well in the land. So actually, by following God also, it'll make us more honest and trustworthy too. And therefore, people will learn to trust us also. And then there's another verse, actually, it talks at the end about how the wicked the wicked don't appreciate it. Notice again in the book of Daniel that Daniel and his friends acted with integrity, but there were people around who were jealous of that. And for us in the Christian faith today, we have faith in God, we put God first, and actually that gives us help in our lives. But not everyone will appreciate that. Not everyone appreciates our Christian faith. And just because we act with honesty and integrity, not everyone will always value that. People will be jealous of us, people are perhaps not as honest as we are, won't always appreciate it, and so on and so on and so on. So follow God, but we have to recognise that we don't always expect everyone to appreciate it all the time. But I want to finish really with a final verse really, which is, I think it's verse 6, which is very special. Verse 7. Verse 7 it is. They are not afraid of evil tidings. Or other translations have it, they're not afraid of bad news. And this is a particularly helpful verse actually for people who are ill. I remember a dear friend of mine who had cancer. Anyone who remember Roy Castle used to do record breakers and so on, and he was a fabulous musician and so on. He was also a very devout Christian, and this friend of mine who had cancer at the same time as he did I had the privilege of speaking to him on the phone, and Roy Castle reminded this friend of mine about this wonderful verse. They're not afraid of bad news, because actually you put God first. And okay, it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen to us. I mean, in Roy Castle's case, actually, he did die of cancer. We all have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But actually, we do not need to fear evil because God is with us. And what the psalmist is saying here in Psalm 112 is, if we put God first in our lives, actually, good and bad things will happen to us, of course, but we do not need to fear because God is our strength and our refuge. Our hope is in him. Now, whatever happens, God is with us. And actually we don't need to be afraid. Of course we will be. We don't need to be as much because we have God with us, helping us on our way as well. So lots of things to learn from this wonderful psalm, okay? It's very much like Psalm 111. 111 is one about the acts of God and fearing God and so on. Psalm 112 is about what happens if we do. And that good things will happen to us. By putting God first, by putting our hope in him, it will bless not only us, but our friends as well. That in a sense, as God is gracious, merciful, and righteous, so we will become more gracious, merciful, and righteous. As we follow God, we'll become more trustworthy, that people will learn to trust us. And we need to remember that not everyone will appreciate it all the time because people will be jealous of us. But by putting our trust in God, we do not need to fear. And though good and bad will happen to us in life, of course, with God on our side, we do not need to fear because he is our rock and our trust in him. As the hymn puts it, all my trust on God is founded. Bless you, my friends. Have a lovely day. More tomorrow. Thanks for watching. And Psalm 113 tomorrow. Another similar psalm, but another beauty.